Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, I didn't know anything about The Last Airbender. Then, everything changed when my best friend said, let's do a podcast. We could call it Avatar State Radio. 6,953 days had passed before I discovered Avatar, not the Blue Cats, but a 19-year-old cartoon. Like Aang, I have a lot to learn, but I believe I'll love Avatar The Last Airbender. Welcome to this week's edition of Avatar State Radio. I'm one of the hosts, Kev.
I'm the other host, Mike.
And we sit here chatting about, rehashing about Avatar The Last Airbender, the cartoon series where one of us, me, has never seen the show before and is watching it week by week, day by day, one episode at a time, and the other one is an avid fan of the entire universe. That's Mike.
Yep, I'm a big fan of the IP, and I am rewatching Avatar to introduce Kevin to this world. And so far, I think it's going off without a hitch.
Yeah, I would say I know I kind of saved this for like the end of like the first section of these shows here, but I'll say it now at the top of the show. Like, you know, we've talked about how a lot of shows we give that 3-episode rule, right? Where if it doesn't catch you by the end of the episode 3, you're probably gonna pass on it. Which hasn't been an issue with this show. Like I've said the last 2 weeks that I think I'm gonna love this show. If there was an issue with this show, episode 3 nailed it for me. Like it was the perfect episode 3. It's like the show knew that, all right, I'm ready for the emotions. I'm ready for like the more adult theme show episode that was like really, you know, while it was an adult theme dealing with death and loss, they handled it really well for a kid's cartoon.
Right. Yeah, they have it very much in the first couple of episodes, like glosses over a lot of like the frenzy and chaos that you can have in a situation like the shape that the world is in. But in this point, you know, seeing Monk Gyatso and definitively knowing that was a friend of yours from 100 years ago that's no more, they really opened it up and said like, hey, this kid's, you know, got more feelings than just talking about, you know, riding penguins and jumping on koi fish and stuff.
Yeah, it was, I mean, and I, you know, loved that both Sokka, and this is me kind of jumping ahead a little bit in my notes here, but both Sokka and Katara were like wanted to support Aang and cheer him up or protect him because they knew going in that this could be bad. Right. And it felt like maybe when you first see the Southern Air Temple, which I thought, you know, when you first see it while they're in flight, it actually like it looks like it's in decent shape. Like it doesn't look like it was attacked or anything because it's not like in ruins.
Right. Correct.
So you really kind of, you know, have Aang who has this hope that maybe there's, you know, there's some falsities to the fact that the airbenders are quote unquote extinct.
Right. And he does have, you know, some good reasons for thinking that, because, you know, he knows from what little training that he has that he's, you know, a decent combatant. And he knows that the logistics of somebody getting to the air temple is very difficult. You know, it's way up in the air, and the only way that we know of at this point is to get there by sky bison. So how would somebody get there to, you know, stage an invasion or something along those lines? But you know, swiftly after arriving, you know, the audience is brought to learn that yes, the Fire Nation did end up there. And then Aang discovers shortly after that yes, and not all of them made it out alive. So it was definitely not a one-sided bloodbath.
Right. Like there is, you know, once you're in the temple and they're walking around and it's clearly abandoned, like there's weeds and whatnot growing everywhere. There's no sky bison. There's no, at this point, no lemurs and no people around. You know, the hope is that, oh, they fled to help in the war and maybe they're out there somewhere.
Right.
is kind of the feeling I got, because Aang was still like, "Hey, let's go play." Well, I guess he didn't say "let's go play" because he was a little distraught in the fact that there was no one there, and it was Sokka that said, "Let's go play." Was it Airball? Was the name of the game?
Right. Yep.
Um, and I thought uh, that was a great piece of character development for Sokka, who, um, again, he continues to prove that he's not necessarily that jerk from episode one,
Right.
where I was really not a fan of him.
Can you
But
imagine like the entire like three season series, like if he never grew at all and he was just a jerk the entire time?
right, and like he's still like, I wouldn't call him a jerk, but he's still like, he's that guy, like he is, or kid, he is that kid from episode one, but he's now has redeeming qualities. I feel like he didn't have those redeeming qualities in episode one.
Yeah, he's got
But
layers.
yes, now he has those layers. He's not a complete jerk. He obviously cares for his sister. He obviously cares for Aang. And Katara says it at some point in the episode, again jumping ahead, that like, hey, we're your family now. Like, it sucks, but we are your
Right.
family.
Right.
And they
And
prove that
that's
like
one of
throughout
the
the entire
things.
episode.
Yep. That's one of the things I think that makes Avatar one of the things that I knew that you would like, because you and I are very much on the same wavelength about like the whole found family trope.
Yeah.
A lot of our favorite material has that kind of feeling to it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It is. I mean, it may be a trope, but it is one that I'll usually get sucked into and fall in love with nearly every time.
Yep.
So my first note was actually, and this was, I think, a line from last week's episode that I saw in the recap that I didn't mention, that Aang has to learn bending in the following order: water, earth, and fire. Is there, and I don't know if this spoils anything if you tell me this, is there a particular reason for that? And was that answered later in this episode when we find out the fact that the avatars are not always
Are we
airbenders, as I asked a few weeks
right?
ago, that they
Right.
cycle through each tribe?
So I feel like that might just be something that's kind of referenced in the recap, and maybe like incorrectly, because right now I'm trying to think of, I mean, obviously like in this series we really only see through the lens of Aang. um you know uh we might get more information about the previous ones, but the only other avatar that we've legit spent time with in the intellectual property is Korra, the next one. And I'm trying to think about whether or not like they made a point of her having to only to learn in that order, and I don't remember it going that way, so it might just be again like a misattribution in the recap.
Right. And I wonder if it's if it is an order. I'm guessing because we also learn that that there's a cycle of air, or a cycle of avatars, and the
Right.
previous one was a firebender, Avatar Ruku,
Roku.
uh, Roku. And my guess is, like, if when he first became, the Avatar, he probably learned the order air, water, and earth. Is my
Correct.
guess. It
If that's the route that they did have to go, and again, I'm not
Right.
really sure. I can't confirm it.
Right. So okay, so that's just a nonsense question that I had. But and then we kind of get to, I think the episode actually opens up with the Prince Zuko and Uncle pulling up to like a Fire Nation port or capital or whatever to get repairs on the ship, and he instantly is lying to ensure that like he's the only one going after the Avatar, which I could have told you the moment he did that, he's like he's going to put himself in a trap, because he's not bright enough to lie, like to
Right.
keep this lie going.
Right. And that, I mean, and to be fair, Iroh wasn't either. And
No,
Iroh
yeah,
was
I
a
mean, he was worse. He was probably worse. Yeah. But I'll tell I'm sticking with these characters for a little bit. this episode actually made you like, oh, like I'm rooting for the prince in this episode.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. They definitely have a kind of situation where um I mean, to some extent, like when you're watching the old cartoons, there's like a little bit of you who's like, yeah, like I like Skeletor, I like the Cobra Commander, I like Shredder and stuff like that. And they give you an opportunity in stepping away from Team Avatar to Team Zuko. It helps a lot to have Iroh on your side, who
yes.
at this point like has no irredeemable features, and then to put somebody up against Zuko, who you root against even more.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think it is like super. Like, one of my notes is I'm convinced that Uncle is good. That Iroh is his name, right? I'm
Iroh.
Iroh. I'm super convinced that, like, and I'm sure like at some point I'm going to be proven wrong, right? But because he is ultimately training his nephew to win a war
Right.
that would essentially be like if the Nazis won World War II,
Well, I'll tell you
at
what.
least in
Do
my
me a
eyes.
favor. Do me a favor. Make a note of I think Iroh is going to turn bad, and I want you to bring that up every episode from now until sometime.
Okay.
I want that
Um,
to be on your permanent theories so that we can address whether or not it did happen that episode.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, it's he feels like he's a good guy ultimately, and even in this episode, Zuko felt like, okay, I think I see, like there could be a point where he flips.
Right.
I feel like that's less likely, but I see it. Like you know, during that fight, you know, obviously he's a little outmatched in the beginning with Commander Zhao, is it?
I think either Zhao or
Or
Zhao.
Shu? Yeah.
It would be either Zhao or Zhao, and I don't remember the pronunciation.
Yeah, I literally just watched it and I already forget it. So forgive us for the if we're pronouncing it wrong. But I mean, he was like he feels like he's just straight bad. Like there's and next to him, Zuko has some redeeming qualities. Like you feel bad for him because you find out that he's banished by his father,
Right.
uh, and that it sounds like Zhao might be the one that gave him the scar. Uh,
Well, so it wasn't that Zhao gave him the scar; it was that he received a scar during an Agni Kai, which is the kind of duel that they just had.
okay, okay,
I don't know if it's
um,
explicitly stated, but it definitely was not Zhao. Like this is, to the best of my knowledge, the first time that Zuko is meeting Zhao.
gotcha. Um, so, but still, and again, it shows you how, you know, the beginning of that fight shows that Zuko is a little overzealous. He does not really kind of follow the advice of his uncle, you know, that we saw in episode 1 where you know you have to know the basics. But then his uncle's cheering him on and giving him that advice in the middle of combat, and he turns it around and he follows the basics, and it shows that when he's being patient and showing some sort of self control, he's going to be a formidable foe for our Team Aang.
Right. Yeah, he's definitely got the ability to, to be a capable warrior. Zhao is someone who's recently been promoted, so at least on like a military circuit, he's probably shown his prowess, um, and jumps right in there, and at some point looks like he's going to best Zuko. So for Zuko to turn it around, you know that he's a tough character in the world of Avatar.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, like, it feels very weird by the end of this episode that, like, oh, I'm rooting for the prince, and I feel like there could be something, whether it's with Zuko or Uncle, something's going to happen at some point in this series. I don't know if it's the series or the season, but where one of them's flipping. I just don't know who
Right.
yet.
Right.
Um,
Even if it's not a full flip, is it something where like one of them can be redeemed or at least seen
right,
as redeemed? Um,
right.
because we know at this point that he's not against the idea of bringing the fight to somebody else if it serves whatever means. And the whole notion of the enemy of my enemy is a friend
Right.
that might be something that exists within this world as well.
Right. Uh, I kind of touched on this already with Sokka and Katara, kind of proving that they are, um, you know, uh, feel like they're family with Aang, with Sokka cheering up Aang to play airball. But there was this like very beautiful moment with Katara where she like has this like motherly protective instinct where they call him over to show him the Fire Nation helmet, but then she hides it to protect him, which might be the wrong choice. That totally could be the wrong thing. But as when you're thinking as a parent, which I think she was there, or like a parental figure. Sometimes you make decisions that may not be correct, but you're doing it because you think it's protecting your child and it's in the best interest of that kid. And I thought it was not only sweet, but it was also, clearly foreshadowing when she talks to him to calm him down from his avatar state where he clearly broadcasted to the entire world that he has returned, because it seems like other temples lit up when he
right
went into
and
Avatar
that was a
state.
part that I didn't remember in my rewatch. I did not remember like the other temples lighting up and everything like that, so it is kind of like, hey, this one guy knows, and then obviously as Zhao learned, these other people learned, but now at this point all the people who are still around those Avatar temples from previous avatars, they are all now very aware that, hey, this day is different than the past, 36,500.
Yeah, and I I'd be interested if we ever see the other temples, just because I'm curious if the statues are literally in every single temple. But it is yeah, I think it was neat that it kind of lit up all the other temples. Like he was in such a emotional state, which clearly right now that we've kind of seen him go Avatar state in 3 episodes now, they've all been emotionally charged for whatever reason. So I'll be very curious to see how that how he begins to control that, because he doesn't have any real leadership in that. Like, and I don't know how avatars learn to control their avatar state, because it sounds like, oh, one avatar leaves and the next one's born.
Right. Yeah. There's never
So
two avatars alive at the same time, based on the concept that, in order for the next person to become the avatar, the other one has to have died.
yeah,
And that kind of wraps back into like the concept that Gyatso said to him, hey, like, we have somebody who you're going to meet, when you get into the air sanctuary. And at least in present day, he doesn't actually meet a person. It's just those statues inside.
yeah.
Um, so was there something of value for him in that circle of statues? Um, like just kind of being, at peace with the cycle that came before you and things like that.
Yeah, well, and it's obviously like he has a moment with that statue, because like he just knows that was Roku, the firebender avatar from his previous life.
Right.
So he just kind of knows it. And yeah, I was going to say something else, and I don't know. um,
Hey, you
but
whiffing on it?
yeah, I had the issue is I saw something come in on another computer and I got distracted a little bit. But regardless, oh, I know what I was going to say, and this leads to, so there was a beautiful flashback of Aang when probably about 100 years prior, just before he got frozen in ice, maybe a year or so before that, who knows, where he is with his mentor and uh, baking cakes, which was like a out of left field moment, really, when like, oh, he's training, and then it turns into this little goofy thing where my note is cake bit good.
Keep it good.
Yeah, it was just this episode had a very good balance, more so than any other episode, um of humor and emotion, because Aang is, for the first time in the series, forced confront those emotions and the reality that he is the last airbender. So like it is a more emotional episode. So the humor that we've seen in all 3 episodes thus far is not overdone. It just it complements the the emotions really well, I think. And the cake bit was
Right. I feel like
fantastic.
there is, like you said, there's a nice balance, and I think in a show about that, like that's something that you really do have to kind of nail down, because you can't have it be too over the top in any one direction.
Right. Right. Um the in that flashback we see, how that sky temple, I'm sorry, it's not a sky temple, it's an air temple. um how
Mhm.
that southern air temple was supposed to be. It was brighter, despite like the sepia tone feel it had. It was brighter, full of life, with sky bison all over, with the flying lemurs all over, which leads to at some point us meeting a lemur. And this is finally circling back to what I forgot about. The lemur, who we are later introduced to as Momo, because he's
Mhm.
now joined the family, and I love it. I love the little sky guy there.
Uh-huh.
But the and that ultimately leads to, because there's a funny chase sequence where Sokka wants to eat, joking around, wants to eat the lemur. Aang wants him as a pet, and that leads to like the avatar state that we've already talked about. Because it leads to where Aang finally sees what happens, or what had happened to
Right.
his temple there. But shortly after that, when they're back in the sanctuary, or is that what it was called, the sanctuary? Am I
Yeah,
making
Gyatso
that?
calls it the sanctuary.
Yeah. So when they're back there, the lemur brings a bunch of food for Sokka. So I'm convinced that Momo is the being Aang was supposed to meet. Because I feel like he is going to somehow. I feel like this lemur is more than just another like fun little animal to have. Like I feel like he's going to have a bigger purpose. I hope he has a bigger purpose at least. Uh,
So your suspicion is that that lemur has somehow been there for 100 years.
Well, I don't know if he's been there for 100 years. I think that the lemur, could be, just a few days, could be a few years old, whatever. But I feel like that lemur there, like,
There's some destiny to it.
yeah, there is some sort of destiny. I feel like there's a reason. Like the lemur knew Sokka was hungry, and it could have just been like, how this is how we make everyone be friends. But in a show that, as we said, is about balance and is about destiny to a certain degree, I feel like there could be something with this with Momo, and that he, like, because he showed up right while Aang was kind of like in a trance with the statue of Roku. Um, and as soon as they were there again, he shows up again with food, and ultimately befriends them and joins the team and the family. So I'm hoping that there's more to it than just another animal friend.
It's a solid theory, and I like it.
Yeah, I hope so. I feel like there could be some sort of destiny that Momo plays for Aang to become the avatar that he's meant to be.
Very, very possible.
Um, so as far as the episode is concerned, I think we covered most of it. Uh, and other than me loving it, and it's still, each episode that continues to be better, I think. And like I said, I didn't need the 3 episode rule for this show, but the 3 episode rule just fully solidified that this show. And I think you've talked about this maybe in every episode, that like this, while it's a cartoon and maybe the first couple episodes are a little kiddie, it eventually gets to some adult things. And I don't need my cartoons to have adult themes all the time. Like sometimes a cartoon could be a cartoon and that's it.
Yeah.
But it's nice when there are heavier themes, just because regardless if it's a cartoon or a live action set piece, those emotional heavier themes are just good story beats to have and help
Right.
develop your characters. So I'm glad that they didn't shy away from it. Because again, I said this at the top of the episode, it was a very it, death and loss is a very heavy subject for adults, let alone kids that are watching this show. So
Right.
I thought it
Well,
was
you know what?
handled very gracefully.
I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Would this be a show that you would watch with your kids?
Oh, for sure. I think any of my. I mean, I don't think my youngest, my almost 3 year old, would have any interest in it. But and I don't think my daughter would either, just because it's not her type of thing. If Trey wanted to watch it, being 12, I would 100% be for him watching it. There's nothing in this show that I think is too heavy for I don't know what it's rated, probably 7 and older, but I don't think there's anything for I have a 9 soon to be 10-year old and a 12-year old, and I don't think it's as presented thus far anything's too heavy for them.
Right. Very good.
Um yeah. So
Maybe after we're done watching, you could do your own rewatch podcast.
it's what's funny is that Trey was like, "Wait, you get to go to cons for free?" I'm like, "Well, not all the time, but sometimes. Like, I mean, I try to go for free because I'm covering it for press or I'm running a table or whatever." He's like, "How do I do that?" I was like, "Host a podcast with me." And then, and it has not happened yet, but so. That brings us to the end of, I think, the first part of our show. Unless you have anything else to say about the episode itself, we can probably move on to
Nope.
trivia.
I think we hit on most of the stuff that won't also be hit on like my trivia kind of
Right.
component. So
Right.
are
So
you ready for trivia?
let's go to trivia.
All right. So these are little tiny bits of trivia, not anything huge, but I'll rattle them off. You'll notice that when Momo brings the food to Sokka, and Sokka is chomping down on all the food, at the very last moment, he steals a peach from Sokka, and that's
Oh,
legitimately what uh, Momo is translated from in Japanese. Momo
what?
is Japanese for peach.
Oh, interesting. I didn't even notice that, which is weird because I
Yep.
was focused in on Momo at the end there, and
Yep. So like Sokka has that face, like you just stole the food that I was eating.
I think I was so focused in on my Momo theory during that moment that I missed that.
That's so funny. So one of the other things about Momo is, I mean, obviously we've already met Appa, but Momo is the second character who is voiced by D. Bradley Baker.
Yes, yeah, I love
So
that he's
he
just
does the voice of both of those
yep,
guys.
yep, the animal,
Um,
the animal guys.
Now we met Zhao. Did you know who played Zhao? Did you do any sneaking around to seeing who voiced him?
I did because it was so familiar, and I was like, "Oh, I know this voice. I know that."
Jason
But what's
Isaacs is
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, and it's I didn't get through my entire like IMDb dive on him, but just much like another unrelated actor to an unrelated project that I did a dive on, like I know Jason Isaacs, and I couldn't find between now and like I went back as far as like maybe 2018. I was like, I don't see one project I remember him from. I feel like I remember seeing him as like in a superhero thing.
So he might have been in a superhero thing. That's not what's reminding me of the big roles that he's played, but he's played a couple of big ones that you'll know. He was Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter series.
Oh,
Um,
that's exactly what it is. That's exactly why
yep,
I know that face, that punchable face.
yep. And he very often has the punchable face. Like it's very rare to see him as a good character. Um, he's briefly like he's a character in Star Trek Discovery. Like he's like the captain of the ship. Um, One of the other things that you'll know him from is the Patriot. He's the villain in the Patriot. Um, he is very often used because he's got the punchable face, and he's one of like the most like prolific actors who's got a lot of talent. So to have him show up in episode 3 is pretty big, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and it is wild seeing all the, well, I guess not maybe all these voices, but it is wild in a show that is, we're not gonna get on that topic. We did this last week, so I'm gonna move on.
So you ready for me to move on to another piece of
Yeah,
trivia?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So I don't think that they ever reference this in the show itself, but in the art of the animated series, it says that the northern and southern air temples, the ones that we just arrived at, the southern one, it was run by monks, but in the western and eastern temples, they were run by nuns,
Oh,
which is
interesting.
interesting. I don't think that in the show we ever see the eastern or western temple, which is it's kind of interesting. It's a fun notion. So I
It
guess that outside of the show, there's got to be more context to the greater world of Avatar.
Right. And it's because initially I was thinking like, all right, well, I guess if like the water tribes and the air nomads, if they're like north, if they're both north and south, the other two must have originally at least been east and west. But I guess it would also make more sense that there are like hubs in all four quadrants for all four nations.
Right. But
Uh,
up until this point, we haven't heard of anything west or east for the water nations,
no, no,
or the water.
I mean, in the show, we've only heard north south for water and just the southern temple for the air nomads, which implies there's a
Right.
northern one.
Right. So I mean, we obviously know that arguably the best friend of Aang growing up before he was in the ice was Monk Gyatso, and Gyatso is actually the last name that the Dalai Lamas use. All the Dalai Lamas except for the first Dalai Lama have used Gyatso as a last name.
Interesting. And that makes sense because he very much gives that vibe, I think.
Right, right,
At least in
and going
statue
hand in
form.
hand with that. Right, right. The Southern Temple is located in the show in the Patola mountain range, and that's inspired by a place in Tibet called the Patola Palace, which is built on Mount Potolaka,
Okay.
which was used as a winter palace by the Dalai Lama from like the mid 1600s until the mid 1900s.
Okay. Yeah,
And,
there is so much I think you get to see so much inspiration from like the Tibet culture in the air nomads. And we see that even more in this week's episode.
right now, one of the other things, I mean, we had mentioned looking at the other temples, and at least one of them, the Fire Temple, was also inspired by a real life place. There's a tower called the Yellow Crane Tower that exists in Wuhan, China. Um, and the only other time that we've ever heard about Wuhan is COVID.
Oh yeah.
So,
Oh
yeah.
man. It's Avatar's fault.
It's all that airbending. Everybody got sick. Two other pieces of spoilers for the episode. It doesn't affect us because or anyone who's listening now because we've already listened to it. But there was a popular fan theory, and I thought that it was actually addressed in the episode itself. So I must have read the fan theory as well. The Obviously we see Gyatso in the chamber with the dead firebenders.
Mhm.
So at some point, he had to have beaten a good amount of them. And the theory that a lot of people have is that the way that Gyatso beat them was to pull all the air out of the room, thereby suffocating everyone.
Oh. Oh,
So
I mean that makes sense. I mean just oh man, that's dark.
that is dark.
That
And to the
is
best of
that
my
is
knowledge, I don't think that that's ever resolved. Like we don't ever see, to the best of my knowledge, what actually occurred.
right.
Whether it's the first live action movie or the new live action series, I think they kind of leave it up to imagination what happened.
Right.
Because whatever happened, like it was big enough where like the firebenders left their dead there. Like
Yeah.
was it enough where like did almost all of the firebenders get wiped out too, or I don't know. So
It's and it because if you're really looking at it, there you don't see much fire damage anywhere. So it's not like it's not like it looks like they torched the place. It does look like they got it handed to them, but still ended up, I guess ultimately winning. But and there's no specifically where Gyatso is. There's no fire damage. Otherwise, you would imagine there would be some charred area of earth, wall, skeleton, whatever. And it looks like maybe that's a good theory. I buy that theory.
Yep. Yep. And I think that's the nice thing is like it really has not been resolved, so you can kind of let it live in your head canon.
Yeah, and it kind of, again, if it doesn't get resolved, so it's just in head canon here, but it allows you to see that, like, and I would imagine most of these battles, the other non-Fire Nation tribes and kingdoms and stuff, they're not like going down without a fight, but it's very clear that Gyatso went down swinging and did what all he could to maybe protect Aang in the long run.
Yeah, yeah, because even if Aang's not there, for whatever reason that which we don't really know yet, you know that your boy is probably the reason that they attacked.
Right.
So,
Is that it, or do you have another one?
nope, that's it. I'm all wrapped up. I
All
kind of
right.
bundled the two together.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I think that's it for this week's Avatar State Radio. Who, while Aang broadcasted once, we broadcast every week right here on avatarstateradio.com. And that's where you can find this show. Nowhere else, because we're not creating social media for it. You can follow me at That Nerdy Kev on every social media except for Facebook. That's at That Nerdy Kev 1984, where I might be talking about this show or other things like my other podcast, Everything is Awesome, on awesomepodcast.com. Mike, where can they find you?
So probably the best place to find me is on telus.com. That's where you can kind of see a bunch of the links to other places. But if you want to see a bunch of my premium stuff, you can go to either patreon.com/telus or telus.etsy.com. And if you want to catch some of the videos that I do, you can catch those on youtube.com/@worldoftelus and twitch.tv/thattelus guy.
And that's it for this week's edition of Avatar State Radio. Again, you can find the show on avatarstateradio.com. We'll catch you next time.
Laters.